Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Philip Macmillan. I'm a physician in the United Kingdom, and I've been focused on science all through the pandemic and talking to scientists, researchers to understand what they do and to raise awareness about what they do. Today is a very important discussion because it's been one of those situations that has been blown up in the media about a trial with regards to hepatitis B in Africa. And you can imagine that this caused a huge amount of interest and focus. So I had the luxury of knowing one of the lead researchers. And so rather than following just the media narrative, I sought out to research and say, listen, what exactly is going on? And so it's with a tremendous pleasure that I've got Professor Christine Stabell-Benn with me, and she will be able to explain a lot more about what has been going on. But before we start, I think that it is important to get a background on this. So, Christine, do you mind just doing a quick introduction of yourself?
No, good evening, and thank you, Dr. Macmillan, for this invitation and opportunity to clarify some of the misunderstandings in relation to this planned trial of hepatitis B vaccine at birth. My name is Christine Stabell-Benn. I'm a medical doctor by training. I'm also a PhD and a doctor of medical science, and currently a professor at the University of Southern Denmark, along with being a chair at the Danish Institute for Advanced Study. I have spent most of the last 32 years studying vaccines, vitamin A, and other health interventions and their effect on overall health at the research collaboration field station, the Bandem Health Project in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. It's a close collaboration between Denmark and Guinea-Bissau that has lasted for almost 50 years now, and I joined in 1993.
Excellent. And it raises the point that you are passionate about vaccines and vaccine research, but your focus on vaccines and vaccine research seems to touch on something that causes controversy because you are not afraid to highlight and look for if there are potentially unknown negative effects that can occur. Is that right?
I think what I'm particularly dedicated to is to study the overall health impact of vaccines in the context where they're used in real life. And I think we have proven through all these years of research in Guinea-Bissau that this is a very important subject of research because unknown to most people, most vaccines were implemented after showing that they had effects against the vaccine disease, and that was considered sufficient to introduce them. And while that is very important, it's also increasingly clear now that vaccines can affect the broader immune system and that in real life they can have other effects than those that were anticipated. And I want to emphasize that we have not only emphasized or studied vaccines for and found negative effects, but actually for many vaccines we found extremely positive effects when they were introduced in Africa, much more beneficial effects than were anticipated based on just the protection against the vaccine disease. So just to give you one example of what our research into the overall health effects of vaccines has revealed in Guinea-Bissau is that the BCG vaccine, the old vaccine against tuberculosis, that it has very beneficial what we have called non-specific effects because it strengthens the immune system much more broadly than was anticipated, and it can protect against a broad range of infections, not just tuberculosis. And that important finding was first done in observational studies where we just in our field station where we follow a population of 200,000 individuals in this close Danish-Guinean collaboration, where we saw that children who were vaccinated with BCG had much better survival than unvaccinated children, and this was just not due to protection against tuberculosis. And we followed up with randomized controlled trials where we looked at a population that didn't receive the BCG vaccine otherwise recommended at birth, and these were the children with low birth weight who were at that time not vaccinated with BCG at birth because they were thought to be too immunologically immature, so the vaccine was delayed. So that provided an opportunity that we are always looking for. And that I want to say is very hard with vaccines that are already implemented to actually do randomized trial trials, but in this subpopulation that would not normally get BCG at birth, we could randomize them to get BCG at birth or no BCG at birth and follow them up. And we found these important effects of BCG vaccine, which were just confirmed here in 2025 in a large-scale randomized trial in India, where they found exactly what we have shown, namely that BCG protected fragile newborns against infections other than tuberculosis, which would otherwise have killed them.
This is an important point because what you are saying is that this kind of research is not just about whether or not harm was caused, but also whether or not there are actually long-term positive effects with regards to vaccines. And this is a critical piece of the discussion because at the moment, as I'm sure you know, there is a lot of negative association about vaccines generally. We'll not get into why at the moment, but it's so important to address that, wouldn't you say?
I would say the important thing is to study what parents ask themselves when they bring their child for vaccination. Will my child be overall healthier from that vaccine? And again, unknown to most people, this has actually not been studied very thoroughly for any of the or most of the used vaccines today, because everybody was so certain that it was all about protecting against the vaccine disease. So what our research has revealed is really that there are broader effects of vaccines, and that parents need to know, and these program managers and vaccine policymakers need to know when they introduce vaccines. So we are providing knowledge, we are closing gaps in the knowledge about vaccines. And I think that closing these gaps is crucial to deserve and maintain public trust in vaccines. So this is really a very crucial area for me, and something that I've, yes, dedicated the last 32 years to studying.
So let's now look specifically at this question about the hepatitis B trial you're doing, because when I looked at the research, all of the research seemed to suggest that the earlier you give hepatitis B vaccines, the better they lower the transmission risk vertically from mother to child. Okay. And it seems as though what's being positioned in the media is that you are trying to question whether or not giving it at birth or delaying it to 6 weeks, which is the standard in Guinea, is what is being studied. Can you clarify exactly what you are trying to achieve with regards to this study?
Yes, so thank you for that question. We have been interested in studying all the routinely used vaccines for their overall health effects. It has been difficult to study hepatitis B vaccine because it's given together with other vaccines in the form of pentavalent vaccine at 6, 10, and 14 weeks of age. But there was an opportunity, and like I said before, it can be difficult to study vaccines in randomized trials once they are policy, but an opportunity to study hepatitis B vaccine for its overall health effects arose when the Guinean government decided to implement hepatitis B vaccine at birth in Guinea-Bissau. And they decided that in 2024 with an implementation date, which is now in 2028. So we have a window of opportunity where the Guinean government has decided we want to implement this vaccine, but they have not yet done it. So what we and I should say hepatitis B vaccine at birth is well established in terms of its effect on vertical transmission from hepatitis B infected, chronically infected mothers, transmission of that virus to their newborn baby. That being said, it's not all countries that have implemented this vaccine because most women are not infected at birth. And most of the transmission of hepatitis B vaccine occurs from person to person and not from the mother to child. So, for instance, just let me say in the European context, in Denmark, for instance, we don't vaccinate against hepatitis B at all. I think many European countries, or some European countries, vaccinate against hepatitis B. Most actually vaccinate against hepatitis B, so Denmark is a bit of an outlier there. But they do it later in infancy, and almost all Western European countries, except from Portugal, don't use the hepatitis B vaccine at birth unless it's to mothers who are hepatitis B positive. So it's a risk-based use of hepatitis B vaccine at birth that depends on having a maternal screening program. And if a mother is hepatitis B positive in pregnancy, then her child is being vaccinated. But the vaccine is not necessary for all the children who are not born by infected mothers. And that's why it's not being used for these children. In the African context, it's also not all countries that use hepatitis B vaccine at birth. Currently, I think it's around half of the countries. There are countries like South Africa that have decided actively against using the hepatitis B vaccine at birth in the recognition that it's not worthwhile because most of the transmission occurs between people and not from the mother to the child. So it's universally recommended by WHO to use hepatitis B vaccine at birth, but it's not widespread. It's not implemented in all countries. And again, coming back to our situation, we have now this window of opportunity to study what nobody has done before, namely what is actually the effect of hepatitis B vaccine at birth, not on vertical transmission, because that's well known, but what is the effect on overall health. And more specifically, we will look at all-cause mortality and severe morbidity from comparing children who have received hepatitis B vaccine at birth with those who have not received it. And that we do best in a randomized trial. And this is exactly what we plan to do based on this very long track record of ours of studying the overall health effects of vaccines, not just their disease-specific effects.
As you said that, I realized why it feels controversial, because suppose you uncover something that is negative. It may be positive, like what you found with the BCG vaccine, but suppose you find something that is negative that could damage further credibility or further trust, public trust in vaccines. Is it actually worth looking at it?
I think we should not shy away from studying anything out of fear that we would find negative effects. That would be totally detrimental to vaccine safety. So we need to ask open, curious questions about the overall health effects of any vaccine. And that
And
is, again, as I said, to maintain and not least to deserve public trust.
And so when you look at the what you are going to be studying, what are the actual endpoints? What you're looking at, all cause mortality, anything else?
And severe morbidity from the age of or the time of randomization to hepatitis B vaccine or no hepatitis B vaccine. And I should say immediately that this is given together with the BCG vaccine and the oral polio vaccines. So these are already implemented at birth. So all children who are in the trial will receive BCG and oral polio vaccine like it's the current policy. And in addition, half of the children by randomization will receive an additional hepatitis B vaccine. So basically, we have a period now where we just have BCG and all polio vaccine. We will have an intermediate period before hepatitis B vaccine is universally implemented for all children. And during that period, half of the children will receive the current policy, half of the children will receive the coming policy. And once hepatitis B vaccine at birth is implemented in Guinea-Bissau, all children will, of course, receive the recommended 3 vaccines.
And here's an interesting question. How long will you follow these subjects to observe the overall effects?
So we follow them from the time of randomizations up to 6 weeks of age when they receive their first pentavalent vaccine. And then in addition, we have 2 other secondary outcomes, which are atopic dermatitis by 2 years of age, and also neurodevelopmental, cognitive development by 5 years of age in a subset of the study participants.
This sounds pretty good. When you then decided to do the study and look for ethics approval, did you come across any significant resistance in Africa to having this study done?
No, we carefully discussed the protocol between us in the study group, and we submitted it to the National Ethics Committee in Guinea-Bissau per usual standard in Guinea-Bissau, and we received approval on the 7th of November this year. 2025.
Okay, so that then leads us to where we are now, because this situation blew up in about December of 2025, where it was all over the news that this was an inappropriate, unethical study because it meant that you were not giving all children the hepatitis B vaccine at birth. What would you say to those critics who say that is an unethical approach because we have already proven the benefit of hepatitis B vaccine at birth? How would you deal with that ethical question?
It's important for me to say that a lot of the critique initially was based on assumptions, wrong assumptions, and that's why I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to clarify, because not one single child participating in this trial will receive fewer vaccines than they would normally receive. On the contrary, our teams, our trial teams, will be at the maternity wards all weekdays, weekends, holidays with BCG and oral polio vaccines that all children will receive at discharge. So this will greatly improve the coverage and the timeliness of those vaccines in children, both because we vaccinate on all days of the year and because we provide the vaccines, and that will avoid the situations where there are stockouts of these vaccines, which occasionally happens. And in addition to that, half of the children will receive a hepatitis B vaccine at birth that they wouldn't receive had the trial not been done. So there's not one child who will receive fewer vaccines. So the whole notion that we should be withholding vaccines for children is simply wrong.
Here's a question. As I said, I have some questions that pop up that some are interesting. And so this is from Sylvester, who asks, how do you prove that the overall difference in mortality between the vaccinated and unvaccinated groups for the hepatitis B are really the result of their vaccination status? Do you consider general causes of mortality between those groups?
Yes, so I thank you for the question and the possibility to clarify here. By the randomization, what happens is that we will make sure that the two randomization group, the randomization ensures that the groups are comparable apart from the hepatitis B vaccine. So all baseline characteristics per the randomness of distribution to vaccine or no vaccine are anticipated to be equally distributed between these children. So the only thing that differs, so any observed difference in mortality or morbidity, be it positive, be it negative, would be ascribed to the hepatitis or can be ascribed to the hepatitis B vaccine. We will study overall mortality, but we will also study hospitalizations, and there we will also look at the different in as a secondary analysis also on the different causes of mortality and severe morbidity.
Excellent. Now, it seems therefore that we have to now go to the biggie in the room. When it comes to funding for this project, it seemed that it all blew up when the CDC gave funding for this project. In the first place, is this a CDC funded project, or is it, what is the reality about this?
This is a completely independent researcher driven research project. So any funder, let me say that upfront, there's no funder that has any influence on the conceptualization, the design, the conduct, the interpretation, and the publication of this trial. And just let me give you some background. I already mentioned that this is our track record. We've been studying vaccines for their overall health effects for many years. The idea came from our group to utilize this window of opportunity to get the data that we don't have yet on hepatitis B vaccine to close the gap in our knowledge. And we conceptualized this in 24. We started approaching various foundations in 2025, both in Denmark and internationally. And by June 2025, we had secured funding, part of the funding from a large American foundation, contingent on us being able to provide or find the remaining funds. within a certain deadline. And we were under pressure for starting to conduct this trial because we had this window of opportunity and we had the deadline from the foundation. So we really looked very hard here, there, and everywhere, approached various foundations, and eventually managed to secure more funding from another American foundation. And then eventually in December 2025, we learned that CDC had been willing to, and to our great pleasure, been willing to provide the remaining funds for us to be able to start the trial, which is planned to start here in the first month of 2026.
Do you honestly think this is why it blew up the way that it did?
Absolutely. So the moment that CDC announced that they had supported this trial, the whole the whole controversy, the whole debate, the spreading of misinformation started. So I think had CDC not funded the trial, nobody had paid attention, and it wouldn't have been this big controversy.
And so then in a pragmatic sense, you must have thought about the implications of the CDC funding this in the current environment as to what is happening in the USA. It- Did you think that it could blow up in this way?
Obviously not. Then I hadn't, I hadn't accepted the money. I think. I mean, yeah. Well, I basically I don't look at the funders as long as we are able to do independent research. This is really critical for us that we can do the research independently of the funders, and I think that's essential, and that we have always done, and that is also the case in this situation. So in that respect, I wouldn't disregard funding from the CDC. And actually, I was super happy about it. And I mean, 1 year ago, everybody would have clapped us on the shoulders for being able to obtain funding from the CDC. But I hadn't anticipated that this would be a political discussion, which has nothing or little to do with the science that we are actually doing. And in that sense, I can kind of, yeah, no, I don't know if I regret it, but I'm really surprised and shocked by the politicization of this study, because the debate has had very little to do with the actual science, and there's been very little attempt, unfortunately, I think, to understand the actual science, just illustrated by the fact that all these media stories started to run before people had even seen the protocol, which we completely according to the plan made publicly available by mid-January.
And so when we are hearing things like the WHO, do they have a view on
Yes,
what you're
so
doing?
WHO approached us and was eager to hear more about this trial, which they stated could have important implications for global vaccine policy. So we are having a meeting on Wednesday with the WHO, actually.
And what about the CDC? Because I looked at some of the media reports, and they were saying the African CDC was looking at the ethics around it and challenging it, and so on. What is going on with that?
I think the whole controversy urged or made a lot of institutions interested in this, and maybe not unnaturally, the African CDC also approached the Guinean government to hear what was going on here. So we welcome any kind of scrutiny and also constructive criticism of and discussion of the study protocol. So yeah, that's the current situation.
I mean, this is a fascinating situation because it gives such an insight into the reality that a lot of what we do in science is tightly controlled or linked to political agendas. How does science remain independent in this kind of environment?
We have to keep on doing, and I'm dedicated to keep on doing what I do despite the controversy, namely to do independent research of vaccines. And it's so important, particularly in times of vaccine hesitancy, that such research is being done also independently of funders, independently of the industry. It's not uncommon for vaccine research to be funded by parties that could have an interest in the results of the research, such as the industry. I mean, industry provides a lot of funding for vaccine research, and that can be politicized as well. I think as researchers, we just need to maintain that we have our independent integrity, scientific integrity and independence, that we're able to do the studies we want to do, and which answers the questions that people really want to know the answers to, and that we continue to focus on the science rather than the politics, even though it's complicated and increasingly complicated as vaccines are, in my experience from these 32 years in vaccine research, increasingly politicized and even weaponized.
Yeah, and I think that the hesitancy, and I usually follow the comments that I see, and so I can see how many people are hesitant globally with regards to vaccines. And there has to be a way to rebuild trust. And I suspect that what you are doing is you are what I consider to be the perfect pro-vax advocate who is not afraid to look at on negative outcomes rather than just promoting something as always being positive. We have to become very clear and honest in our communication. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. We need to be honest. We need to be transparent about vaccines, and we need to build policies on solid evidence. And there, it's become increasingly clear that solid evidence is by studying effects on overall health, not just the vaccine-specific outcomes.
And when we think of another question that had been raised is if you got funding to do this research in Guinea-Bissau, why didn't you focus on just getting the children, all the children, vaccines at birth rather than studying the impact on some not having it at birth? That's another part of that ethical question.
Well, I'm providing vaccines to children as a programmatic thing lies with health service providers. I'm not a health service provider. I'm a researcher, so I'm studying vaccines. If I just gave vaccines to all children, I would be a vaccine provider. So that is this is like mixing apples and bananas. It has nothing to do with research. I'm happy that there are health services, but they do what they do. I do what I do, and that is research.
Wow. Yeah, that's an important context. So, and this window that you have, because this study will be going forward for a few years, how tight is the window to get this study started?
So we need to get started to have sufficient power to address the research questions we are asking. We need to enroll 14,000 children in the trial. And of course, we cannot continue enrollment after the vaccine has become policy. That initially was said to be in 2027, but it has just been postponed to 2028. And that gives us some more time to enroll sufficient number of children to address the research questions that we would like to address.
Excellent. And so when you look at how political and how the media has taken this story, is there any way that we can try and bring it back to the foundations of science? I suspect the answer lies with the ethics committees. That's their job, is to work out if a study is not ethical. And so if you have gone through the ethics and if they haven't raised any further concerns, that probably means that the study is fine.
According to the National Ethics Committee in Guinea-Bissau, this study is approved. And I think it's a little bit thought-provoking that the people have accused us of being Danish researchers experimenting on African children are the same people who are, I think, disrespectful of the Guinean Ethics Committee by suggesting that they haven't done their job properly. So I think we have to trust the National Ethics Committee in Guinea-Bissau and the Guinean researchers who are on our team to think about what's best for the Guinean children.
And as we go forward in terms of the kind of research that you want to do, as I said, in an increasingly polarized environment and in an environment where more than ever trust needs to be built with independence, how does the public support this work because it's in their interest for more and more independent research?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that one. But I think it's important not to. I think the lesson learned from this situation is that one shouldn't trust everything one reads on social media and not even in mainstream media outlets.
And so
Go to the source. Go to the source.
and go to the source. So did any of these media outlets reach out to you to try and get clarity?
Yes, and we also did try our best to reply to them. I have to say we were overwhelmed with requests. We didn't reply to each and every one, but we've done our best to clarify misunderstandings along the way.
That's
And we have
excellent.
also, I also want to mention, and maybe you will bring in the link here, our website where we have a lot of information about now the full protocol is publicly available. We explain about the trial, and we have also an FAQ sheet that addresses the questions that have been raised.
And what is the name of the website?
It's www.bandim.org.
BIM.org. I'll put it up so people can see it. www.bandim.org. Let me just see this here.
Yes.
That looks correct. Yes. So that's where people can find independent information to clarify what exactly is going on. Listen, I think that this is a perfectly succinct focus on what actually happened. Now, what I want to ask you as we tie this together, because I don't want to overwhelm people with information. When you look at this situation now and you see what has happened, where do we go in the context of science where it can be kept independent and not disrupted by the sways of either finance or politics interrupting the kind of work that needs to be done?
Another good question I don't know the answer to. Yeah.
Yes, I know it is. These are challenging times. And as I said, I do so much appreciate that you've been willing to come and actually take these questions head on, clarify what it is that you guys are doing, demonstrate that this is of value to the whole world in terms of understanding non-specific effects with regards to vaccines, whether or not they may be positive or negative. And this is the kind of work I think that we need to continue on in the future. As we close out, Christine, any final thoughts that you'd want to say to the audience?
Yes, I just want to emphasize once again that this trial is done with the purpose of improving child health in Guinea-Bissau, that it builds on a long-lasting, respectful, and very fruitful collaboration between Danish and Guinean researchers. The trial was approved by the ethics committee. Not one single child will get fewer vaccines that they would normally have gotten, and the trial will close an important gap in our knowledge about hepatitis B vaccine. So I'm dedicated to continuing and getting the research done despite the controversy.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. I'll ask you to hold on with me until after the outro. And thank you, everyone who is watching with us. Have a great evening.
Thank you for the invitation.